Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Citizen Bear, a podcast where we're talking about some of the themes from my book, The Demonstrative Citizen, and kind of taking them and looking at our society today and how they really line up with who we are and what's going on in our world. And maybe, while the book is a fictional book, I think that it's becoming a little more and more pointed to what's going on in our society and some of the choices that we're being forced to look at and make in our society. So I think it's great to go through and just kind of take a look, and there's a little food for thought here. This episode, I really want to talk about something that I think is really cool, and it kind of picks up on the last 2 points, last several podcasts. And I think it's going to be a transitional topic that takes us into the future, and I want to have several episodes where we're going to talk about some things that, everything on emergency preparedness to personal preparedness to talking about what's going on with some of the aspects of our world. And I think this is a great transition, though, and a great conversation where we're getting off the faith, the total faith aspect of it, and just talking a little bit about some of the signs and some of the problems, the mindsets that we're living with. And, I call this, fine lines and absolutes. And we become very, I was just talking about this, how in my many years, I've noticed that in particularly the last 2 or 3 decades, we've really become very focused on being absolute in our society, and how so many ideological views, the polarization has made people very absolute in our society and that in our world. And they're also becoming very quick to jump across lines. And this is something we see from that Marxist ideas to push those lines and break through the lines of society that keep the boundaries of free and decent society, and turn them upside down and shatter those boundaries. But I think that we also, the terms of being absolute, and that concept is kind of a really foreign concept to a free society. And we've always been a society of possibilities, and I talked about this in the last episode, where we should be talking about possibilities. We should be talking about opportunities. We should be talking about, how we can do the things we can do and how we can be better, not just the simple absolutes. Absolutism is very much an authoritarian concept, and it's an evil concept, and I think we should be careful about it. And so we're going to talk about that, but first I want to do a quick call out on my Calling Bull segment here, and I want to return to my episode on gun control, which I have to emphasize here, and I think some people were kind of like, they get into the constitutional law part of this, and that episode was never meant to be a discussion on the finer points of constitutional law and some of the recent cases that have been brought out. It's really meant to be more of a conversation of an overall assault on our rights, and that gun rights are really a segue for an assault on our overall rights by a far-left Marxist movement in our country. And I think that we have to really, really be careful about this. And it's really kind of a frightening concept when we see this assault coming and trying to shave away our rights, just like an apple, cutting it back a little bit at a time. With the gun rights particularly, you see the AR-15 platforms. We've already lost full automatic weapons. You go down and you shave away, then we'll take away semi-automatic weapons, and then weapons that hold any firearm that holds too many rounds. And then, we start chopping away at bigger sections of things that might be considered tactical. Or then you get down to the fact of, maybe even some revolvers. You won't need that for hunting or whatever. And that's not what the Second Amendment is about, and that is not our right. But they just keep attacking it and pounding on it. And I think there's a bad tendency in some of the courts. I think some of the courts have become completely ideological, but I also think some of the courts have this sense of appeasement, like these people keep screaming on it, when in truth they're screaming because a majority of the people don't want it. They have to be louder and more aggressive, and they keep trying to pass laws in ideologically entrenched areas to try to challenge this, and it really is becoming an assault on our rights. And if we allow this to continue, the concept of this pounding and assault on our rights, then we are going to face a situation where we are setting a precedent and an idea whether that pounding can occur, and it's already happening in other areas. We're doing it to ourselves in some places, where other rights will quickly be faded away. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more in this episode. So that's why I think this touchback on calling bull on the overall assault on our gun rights and the overall assault on our rights in general has to stop. And I think the courts have to slam the door closed on this, because if we don't, it is going to continue to be an ongoing problem, not because of any constitutional, whether it's a well-used gun or a popular gun, or there are a lot of them out there. It's in the mainstream of our society, or whatever you want to say. The point here is not anything except to diminish our rights, and that has to be stopped. And we have to call bull on this, and it's time to just say no more. And I think it's also important to say that the right to keep and bear arms and the people's rights, and particularly with the AR platform guns, I'm going to tell you right now, what some people want to call assault rifles, which is a bogus term, is just, it's a made-up term. It sounds scary. I think that we want to do this and press they want to press this issue, and they want to erode this. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't believe the American people are going to give up the guns. You can outlaw anything you want. You can go out there and try to do this anything you want. And I don't mean any disrespect to the Supreme Court, because I think they do a great job, and they're very learned people, all of them, and we should have great respect for their thinking and their discussion. But I think that at the end of the day, I think this is quickly becoming a topic because of the aggressive onslaught on it and the perspective of the American people. I don't believe the American people are going to stand for it. I really don't. And I believe this is a hill that the majority of American people are going to plant their flag on. And if they do, you got a real problem. And I think the Marxists might love that idea, but they may not love it in the end. And I have to tell you, we need to avoid that. And the best way for us to avoid that is for the courts to start slamming the door on this nonsense. That the intent of these lawsuits, the intent of these laws that are out there, the intent of this movement is to just diminish our rights, not just our gun rights, but all of our rights through a slow, painful, never-ending pounding that is designed to break everything down. And I think it's time we started pushing back. No ruling, and I have to emphasize this. I know that, and this lays into my concept of absolutism in our country today. We should be very cautious about these things. The American people do get a vote. They get a vote with their elected officials, and if people push too hard, they may find that they're not popular. But it is absurd to think that the city of Chicago or New York City should set precedent for gun rights throughout this country, or even be allowed to use it in their own land to set precedent or pierce the veil of our gun rights. It's just absolutely nonsense. And we have to start closing this down and reject it. And if our leaders can't do that, if the intellectuals can't find a way to do that, I fear the American people will. And I think so we should be a little careful, and we should call bull on this again. And I think this plays into some of my ideas on what we're going to talk about with big government, and talking about some of the fine lines in our society, and also our and absolutism. So moving on. When we allow our society to talk in terms of absolutes, we begin to cross a line into authoritarianism. With few exceptions, only evil talks in terms of absolutes. I suppose that for Christians, Christ is King of Kings, our Redeemer and our Savior is an absolute. I think many of us would hold to that. I think many people out there hold their imperatives, their moral imperatives, as absolutes in their lives. However, they might be more accurately defined as essential and a foundation to their lives, not really absolutes. When we talk about absolutism, we close the door on growing, on reason, and even true morality as it's based in love. In free society, the whys and wherefores matter. And when we talk in terms of absolutes, we eliminate that. We close the door on considerations and facts, which becomes a quantum leap backwards for all of us. When we start the path of authoritarianism and we start down that, we hear more and more absolutes, and that is I've really seen this concept where as government gets bigger and bigger, the bureaucracy gets more and more empowered. We start talking more and more about absolutes, and we stop talking about possibilities. We stop talking about the whys and wherefores. We stop talking about hope and the reasons we do things. It's just absolutes. And that is the end of free society. There are many fine lines in our world, and those who seek to overturn free society seek to obscure or blur these lines with the changing of free society in the name of safety, security, equity, and so on, often in the face of some great threat, imagine that, which may be self-serving and possibly a false flag. When law enforcement is allowed to decide for society what is acceptable speech, censorship basically, and we did see FBI agents living in places like Twitter and Facebook and other things. I lived with it. We cross a line from free speech to a police state. There is no power granted to the police, to the FBI, or anyone else to monitor speech or to tell people what they can and cannot talk about. Obviously, there may be a crime committed if that speech goes too far on hate or hurting someone or doing something like that, but, there may be a crime committed. That's a different story. But to outrightly censor people, that's not your purview. That's a police state. When a bureaucracy is allowed to regulate what is good and what is verboten, often based on ideological ass-kissing, for lack of a better term, we've crossed a line into an autocracy, a bureaucracy that is unto itself, and just simply using regulatory power or the power of law and construing laws how they want to, and simply forcing people to live, ever clamping down ever further and ever further what is a good business, how to run your business, what your business is, all kinds of things. Podcasting, are you really socially acceptable? Do we want your podcast? If you don't want my podcast, don't watch it. That's free society. Empowering a bureaucracy to run our society and continue to clamp down control is autocracy. When we allow extreme ideology to replace the legal foundation and boundaries of free society in the name of a greater good, we submit to the tyrant. When we replace the quiet strength of faith with the proud arrogance of the Marxist, and when we replace empathy with aggression against those whom we may disagree, we do far more than lose free society's moral compass. We commit blasphemy, in my opinion. While all societies have laws and rules, it is the authoritarian who emphasizes a never-ending and ever-growing list of what you should not do, which leads to control. Free society, in contrast, emphasizes what we should do, and we talked about this in the faith aspects with Christ. We should talk about what we should do. We should talk about possibilities. This is the true This is the true basis of our individual thoughts and actions, our ability to grow and achieve beyond our current circumstances. In many ways, this is the difference between the old biblical laws and Christ's teaching. While never dismissing the old laws, Christ taught us more often than not what we should be doing instead. While Christ emphasized the old law's permanence, he showed us a better way to approach life and the application of those laws. In many ways, they didn't have to be in a certain way. Ironically, if we seek to do good and pursue the right thing, more often than not, the law becomes irrelevant because we're doing the right thing. When big government, its bureaucracies, and its enforcement agencies press a never-ending burden of what we cannot do, it becomes increasingly impossible to do what we should. This is not a new form of liberty. It is simply a tired and defeated conformity. In many ways, this is what the Pharisees did to Christ, using the laws as an absolute for political purposes. They closed their hearts and minds in the name of power. We should be very careful of this in our open and free society, because I've seen it more and more. It's out there. Bear faces this in the story time and again. Our society is torn between the absolutes of big government and the authority and nobility of the individual. He dealt with a paramilitary force that, because our troops are so stretched out, the governor of the state built a paramilitary force to deal with the people and to deal with the militia movement that had been started, fighting back against an invading force in their communities. And in many ways, ironically, this force is taking the side or helping and empowering the invading force, but it is so necessary for that big government to have absolute control that they don't care. They don't even care that they're losing to someone else but to allow their own people to take some action of their own and they're not in control. How self-defeating is that in a concept? We see in one of the stories in the book, and again, I wrote this long before current events, ICE agents show up and attempt to take two of his friends, who are actually illegal, and they admit that. But they're very good Christian people, and they work very hard to help the movement that Bear is in the militia movement, and they feed hungry people, and they do good things, and they're a very important part of this. And Bear realizes that this is, they got 130,000 foreign troops in multiple cities on the northeast coast, and you're coming here trying to take these two people away. But again, this is a political action. It's not that he opposes illegal immigration or, ICE or anything else, but he sees law enforcement being used in a legal way. In our society today, it is very much being used in a legal way for a very righteous cause that they didn't create, they're trying to fix. There is a grave difference. This is a political onslaught. And he realizes that, again, this is just another way of an authoritarian kind of mindset, an absolute mindset in government, trying to control him, his people, and the people he's surrounding himself with any means necessary, even in the face of a foreign power, whether they are in collusion with that foreign power, or they're just so lost with having power themselves, they can't imagine people thinking for themselves. And that's not free society either. That's choosing between two evils. That's not a great thing. But what it also emphasizes in the book and in our society today, I think to some degree, we are looking at a time where we have to deal with our internal strife before we're going to be able to deal at least well, with an external enemy, a real external enemy. And I think we're going to have to look at that. And I think it would be better if we dealt with it in a good way, as a community mindset and not an apocalyptic mindset, to deal with that and embrace people and try to heal those wounds with as many of these people as possible. Because if it does come down to a bad thing, it'll be very ugly. And I guess I have to reemphasize that in the book, and in some cases, and even in our society today, much of this absolutism and mandatory thinking and this constant control from big government and more laws, more bureaucracy, more regulation, really is in contrast to really rational thinking. Like, sometimes I watch the news and I'm like, what the hell are you doing? What's the point in this? And we've seen this happen. We've seen it growing over the last 30 years. It's quite frightening. It's a kind of some mindset that really didn't happen. I think there are a lot of younger people out there that don't appreciate the fact that we didn't do this. Even with two parties or different views on things, God, we had political discourse, and people disagreed, and they were red in the face and stomped their hands on the table. But we always, the Reagan mindset that at 5 o'clock at 5 o'clock on Friday we were all Americans and we could have a cocktail together and talk about the way forward. And I think that's just great, and we need to get back to that kind of mindset where we have great struggles, and we argue and struggle with our concepts and our ways forward, but we find a better way forward through that. But at the end of the day, we never disrespect each other. And I think one of the great things that got lost in our society with that is we had so many great men and women who had come through World War II who were in our leadership, and even Korea and other things where they were in our leadership, and there was a huge mutual respect between these people. They could argue. They were on different sides of the aisle. It's amazing how two people who served in the Pacific Theater or something in the Marine Corps could have totally different views on moving this country forward. But at the end of the day, there was only so far they would go in their discourse, because they respected each other and they knew how much they had given and fought for this country, and what they had sacrificed and what they had seen and what they had endured, and how they had helped change the world for the better. And so, never would you disown or discredit a fellow patriot like that. And we need to get back to that mindset. And I think one of the problems that we have out there is we hide, particularly in the far left today. We have this concept of this absolutism in this neo-Marxist movement that has taken hold, and has particularly taken hold of the leadership of the Democratic Party, and I'm afraid. And trust me, I don't say that to be anti-Democratic Party. We need two good parties. I mean, I do. It's just I believe because of this, the Democratic Party is becoming unviable. Unfortunately, I think when we see these people and these leaders, and they're absolute in their belief on what they want to do in this neo-Marxist movement and overturning our society, and they want that to move forward. Maybe they believe they can avoid a war or something else by conforming, but that has never worked. And I think that when we consider that, we have to really kind of look at the fact of, are they really not being absolute and moving back to the center, or are they just lying to us and covering it up so they can get back into power and do it all again? And we have to be cautious about that. And again, that talks to crossing the fine lines in our society. We've become very torn between the absolutes of big government and the authority and the nobility of the individual. And we really have to be careful about that, because we are a society based on the authority and the nobility of the individual. We also have to be careful on the other extreme, not to cross those boundaries that circumscribe our society, so that we cross between freedom and anarchy. We should never get to the point where we are so free that we can do whatever we want. We have to have some boundaries, and that's why some laws and some consensus on us, and having our morality found, our imperatives founded in morality founded in faith based in love is really something that helps us circumscribe our actions in the world and have these boundaries. But if we don't do that, we can devolve into anarchy, where anybody's whim is an excuse for violence or harming others or a different way forward, or whatever you want to call it. And that is not a good thing, and anarchy just will not prevail as a society. It will destroy itself by its nature. But the Marxist is more than happy to use anarchy to serve their purpose, to bring society to a point that will usher in the authoritarian regime. The patriot on the other side fight for the rights of the individual and a government of the people that's balanced with checks and balances, and where absolutes cannot thrive. Because in a government that is checks and balances, in a government of the people, where discourse is our discourse is held out in the open, and we resolve it through compromise, and finding a way forward, then we really can never talk in terms of absolutes. We talk in terms of possibilities. And we have to get rid of those absolute mindsets. You know, I've been amazed that over the years in my life, I have seen this change. I just talked about this a little bit and just lament for a moment. I'm really shocked at how many of our government agencies and our law enforcement and so many other people from both sides of the aisle. Let's not mince words about it. Let's not. I don't want to be like try to be political here. Both sides of the aisle are desperately guilty of this when they're in power. Sometimes we talk in terms of absolutes, and I see it more and more, and particularly coming out of, some of our law enforcement agents on the federal level and sometimes in the state level. Actually, the local level, it tends to be pretty good anymore, but most of the time, everybody can have a bad egg once in a while. But this concept of that we have an absolute right to do something. We have an absolute right to interfere in your life. We have an absolute right to arrest you. We have an absolute right to do these things. And what you're doing is wrong. We're absolutely sure. Maybe. But that absolute voids the rights of the American people. It voids the authority of the American people. It probably violates the law in many cases because you really don't have the authority in some cases. You still have to follow the rules. And you don't get to construe the law just so you can get what you want or press an ideological view or just make a power play. You don't get to harass people just because of who they are or where they are. Sorry. That's just not a free society. And we have to be careful about this, and we get these activist groups who are attacking people based on their faiths for some ideological reason. And we can't do that. We cannot talk in terms of absolutes with these things. Again, that is the antithesis of free society. Unfortunately, this is not the final word on this matter. In our society and in our time, there's a great storm rising in our world, which is designed not only to unseat free society from the top of the world stage, but to ultimately wipe it from the face of the earth. This authoritarian enemy now not only lives amongst us, but has taken hold in many aspects of our governance. They do not share our morality or our imperatives. Therefore, their oath to uphold the Constitution is without merit. Many more have entered this country illegally, and they have deep malignance to our way of life and to free society. I fear many of them have been sent here for just that purpose. Far too many in our country have wittingly or unwittingly taken up the Marxist and the authoritarian cause, maybe through immaturity, maybe through any other means. But we should be very careful about this. And I want to make a reminder for many people who think that's clever. History has shown us that the useful idiots, what you fall under if you're doing that, are the first to be crushed by authoritarian regimes they help to install. You usher in a Joseph Stalin or an Adolf Hitler, you may find yourself dead. And there is no one to give them checks or balances, and there is no one to help you if they get into power. So we should be very careful about this. When you're thinking of that, it might be fun to go harm Jewish students or do other things like that, or harm police officers or do other things. You take up arms. Taking up arms against your country is a very serious thing. About your law enforcement, it should not be taken lightly. It is a matter of the most extreme, where you are no longer really taking on your government. You're taking on something that replaced your government, or that your government is so threatened by a foreign enemy that you have no choice. But that is not what is happening here. These are people who are taking on our government and taking on other people who mean them no harm. I don't care what your ideology is. You can preach from the top of the building about your ideology. You want to fight for the Palestinian cause, and you don't like Jewish states politics, have at it. But you don't get to hurt people. You don't get to hurt young people trying to better their lives either. It would appear to me that we the people have been given a less than desirable choice. There are far too many in our government who have taken up this cause, and in our society who have taken up this cause, believing that they can reshape our society and the free world into what many often call the New World Order, believing that this is the way forward to save society. And what they're really giving you is fake freedom that is actual authoritarianism. They're giving you authoritarianism and coating it with an icing of liberty, but it's not really liberty because they can come get you any time, right? You don't have any rights. You have permission. Unfortunately, with that, one of the biggest problems I have is the idiots who helped create this problem are the people who are now preaching the New World Order. Why would I help? Why would I want what they want? That's a very self-serving concept. You broke it, and then you're telling me that you need a new car. Sorry. Go get your own car. Don't waste my time. You ain't taking mine. The other option that we have is to live under the authoritarian rule of China. It's not really much of a choice, is it? Outright authoritarianism. I think we should take option C and just stay with our messy freedom. How about that? And you know what? Insist that our government and those in the world respect it. And we do have a right as a people to demand that, if we have the courage to fight for it. Sometimes we get too caught up in all the crazy politics, and we stop and really take a look at the people. We need to really vote for the people who really, no matter what bumps, bruises, warts, and scars they may have, are the people who are really going to try to heal things and are going to try to end war and try to take our society back to its liberty and stand up to some of these activist movements within our country. I have to emphasize that when we talk about the New World Order too, by the way, I don't think that we should be afraid to, we shouldn't rule out the fact that the world is becoming a smaller place through technology and other things, and that's a good thing in many ways if we manage it properly. And we shouldn't be afraid or unrealistic that over time certain boundaries of nationalism will fall to our common interests in art, science, and even economics. And we should look to that, and we can solve some of these problems by doing those things. And I think we're working on some of that right now. And again, we should not talk in terms of absolutes, that people are entitled to an absolute, economic, way that, whether it's tariffs or other things like that, or certain industry or whatever. We have to be a little flexible. We have to move back and forth, and those sands will continually shift for a long time to come. And we need to grow those things. But it doesn't mean that we have to live under an authoritarian rule either, just because we're doing that. What we have learned is that for people who want to overturn free society, regardless of their own political system, have no place in our world community. They have no place in our society. We quietly crossed that line decades ago with an absolute mindset that we only serve to strengthen our enemies. Our place in the world, our liberties, and our way of life are neither absolute nor free. We must strengthen them, renew them with every generation if we are to preserve them. It is important that we remember that our place in the world, that liberty, the Constitution of the United States and the liberties it grants us, divided government, is something that is not guaranteed, not at all. As a matter of fact, in our fallen world, it appears, unfortunately, that we have this propensity towards power, greed, vanity, and those are the tools of the authoritarian. So it is through us, and it is through the use of faith in our society and a belief in our free society that we must always fend that off and prove it invaluable. The economic empowering of China has been one of the worst things that we have done, and I don't know if it was done with the best or the worst of intentions. I suspect a little of both when you look at the truth. We undermined our moral imperatives, including faith. The undermining of our economic society and our industrial base is tantamount to Benedict Arnold weakening and abandoning the fortifications around West Point in the Revolutionary War, thereby leaving the door open to the British to exploit a strategic and tactical weakness. Fortunately, Washington was able to intercede and fix the damage done by Benedict Arnold and refortify those positions and remand those positions, blocking the British from moving up the Hudson. And that happened before tragedy could strike. I believe today that the world is waking up to the mistake that they made. And I believe they've become somewhat concerned about it. But we have to start acting on this because a great deal is at stake. And we have empowered this, and all the free world must be like Washington. We must refortify. We must re-strengthen ourselves. We must get back to basics because what we didn't work. So I kind of want to wrap this up, kind of conclude this. Our society, free society, must always be circumscribed with the boundaries of our common imperatives. We must have rules, laws, and they must reflect our common good, our common goals, our decency. We were never meant to use law and regulation handed down from bloated government to restrict our lives and live under the boot of absolutism. And it is a boot on our neck, make no question. Rather, we are charged to grow and learn what we should do as free people. And that charge comes from our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence. It comes from God. Make no question. We are charged with the good we must do and the possibilities that we must seek. We are charged to go out into this life and be better. Walk that journey of both faith and citizenship. And that all starts with one very fundamental concept. We must learn again to make sure we care for each other. It is very difficult for me to say this because it is out so much on the internet. It is very much against what any father and husband would want, even though my son's a grown man. It is very hard to think that war is upon us. I hope that is not an absolute, or it shouldn't be. I hope that is not a boundary we have to cross. Unfortunately, it appears that countries like China and Russia, maybe with help from Iran, and I don't even know if Korea counts because it's just China. But if we're looking at that, it is very clear to me that they really believe that the time has come to overturn free society through war, and that expanding their empires militarily, much like Japan tried in World War II, Germany certainly tried in World War II, that they can topple free society and usher in governments and that are in their image. And I think we should all be very concerned about that. And I think we should be very worried about what that means. And we must be prepared to stand up to the enemy internally if we are really going to stand up to the enemy externally. And it is not a pleasant thing to say in free society. It is hard to separate and draw those lines. But we must get our back up and we must be strengthened. Not that we have to be absolute in that. There's a lot of grace and a lot of good and a lot of discussion, a lot of possibilities out there in those things. We have always been a melting pot, and we should always be a melting pot. But we should do it the right way. And we should do it with the right means, with the right thought, with the right imperatives, morality, and faith. Not just one faith, but faith, as long as it's founded in love. And we have to wipe that enemy from us, and we have to be prepared. So let us resolve ourselves to avoid absolutes. Whether you are a Republican or a Democrat, as we move forward with many of the tasks that are ahead of us, let us be careful of absolutes. And let us be careful. It is all right to believe in your position and to argue your position, but we should be careful of absolutes, especially our law enforcement agencies. And we should be prepared to go forward and do good for each other and in the world. So the next episode, I want to start talking about this a little bit and the concept of this being out there. It seems that we're not really taking it very seriously on a lot of levels, and I don't blame anyone for sticking their head in the sand, but certainly I like the idea. But we need to start thinking about preparedness, and there's a lot of people talking different things about preparedness, and I'd like us to take our own view of this and maybe get some people in to talk about it, but really start talking about different aspects. And it's not all just like emergency preparedness, like, get your MREs and stuff. That's not what I mean, that's some of it, but we also want to talk about mental preparedness and, a mindset with this and starting to get yourself together. And, a lot of countries are doing this. And I've talked about it in a couple of previous episodes, but it is a good thing for us to start getting into an idea where we can think about how best to be prepared in a world that may devolve around us. And that doesn't mean the end of free society. It may mean its new beginning, if we're strong enough to do that. And I believe we are. But it is good to be ahead of the curve on this. That is a hard lesson that Bear learns in this. And his preparedness helps him greatly. But it's only a personal small effort. And he has to go about different means of providing for his people and his family in difficult times. So we should take a look at that. So until next time, carry on.